Hello, and thank you for your patience. My name is Anna, and I'll be your host today. I'd like to thank you for joining Fuel Freedom Foundation's premier webinar event. We're delighted to have you. And this will actually be one of many Fueling the Future webinar sessions. We'll continue hosting a variety of webinars with industry professionals, energy experts, and political leaders to discuss the feasibility of flex fuels, the cost benefits of alternative fuels, and the positive macroeconomic impact of oil independence. So I'd like to give you a little background on the foundation. We break America's oil addiction, and we believe that an open fuel market with cheaper, cleaner, and domestic replacement fuel options will set us on a path to lower fuel prices, job creation, and increased innovation. We'd like to thank Luft and Korin, co-directors of Institute for the Analysis on Global Security, for discussing their book, Petropoly, The Collapse of America's Energy Security, and with us today. We expect the webinar to run approximately 30 to 40 minutes, at which we will hold a 10-minute Q&A session. And if you have any questions during that time, please send them to us via the Q&A box, as all the attendees will be muted. The box is located in the right corner of the webinar screen, and we'll answer as many questions as we can with the time we have allocated. There are also some icons where you can let us know if we're going too fast or too slow, and that should cover it. Now, without further ado, please welcome Luft and Korin.
Annie is with me. Thank you all for joining us. I hope that if you have already read the book or about its contents. So I'd like to start off by a little bit about why we wrote the book. At this point in time, when everybody hears about the fact that America is increasingly independent of imported oil, and we are in the midst of this boomlet oil production here and there, and here we come with a book that talks about the collapse of America's energy security paradigm. Clearly, I think, according to our view, unsatisfactory about the fact that we are producing more oil because we've not been able to address the issue that really bothers us, and that's not how much oil we import or even consume, but the price of oil. And what really brought us to write the book is the question: why is it that we are becoming more self-sufficient in oil production, but at the same time it hasn't really affected the price of crude? I think that brought us to really summarize what we call the old paradigm. The paradigm of energy security is basically comprised of the following tenets. One is that the U.S. is heavily dependent on mixed oil. We hear it from our presidents, senators, members of Congress, our pundits, etc. We hear it also that the U.S. should strive for self-sufficiency, that we need to lessen our imports. We also hear that the U.S., depending on your political opinion, if you are a Republican, you're probably more like to advocate that the U.S. should drill more. And if you're a Democrat, you're probably more likely to advocate lessening the use of oil through efficiency or make the price of gasoline higher, etc., etc. So, and efficiency, in our view, are two of the same coin, both designed to reduce imports. And final tenet is that the U.S. self-reliance in oil will lower global price, the global price of crude, and therefore weaken unfriendly regimes. We've had a lot over the years from pundits on the right and the left. So this is the old paradigm. And, you know, as you can see, we've been hearing this from people from New English to Tom Friedman and Charles Kreithammer, really across the board. Newt Gingrich actually published a book titled "Drill Here, Drill Now, Pay Less." He basically summarized the conventional wisdom that if only drilled more oil, we'd be paying less. So let's try to look at this paradigm and begin to check its veracity. The thing that we discovered is that we're not dependent on the Persian Gulf for our crude supply. In fact, we've never been. We looked at the history of the past 40 years, and never in history the United States was more dependent on the Persian Gulf, or dependent on the Persian Gulf for more than 50% oil needs. Currently, our dependence on the Persian Gulf is at 9%. So only 9% of our oil comes from the Persian Gulf. So we are not dependent on the Persian Gulf for our supply of oil, but we are dependent on the Persian Gulf for the price of oil, because as you all know, if something happens in the Middle East, it immediately has an impact on the price of crude, even if we do not import crude region. And the best example is what happened in Libya in 2011 when the civil war started there. The price of oil jumped by $21 a barrel for an American consumer, even though the United States never really imported at that time crude from Libya. But we were still affected by the increase in price that were caused by the instability there. The thing that we learned is, as you can see in this graph, is what energy security paradox. Essentially, a steady decline in imports of oil, but at the same time, an increase, substantial increase in the price of crude. So, the same period of time that our dependence on import oil went on from over 60% to about 40% today, the price of oil essentially quadrupled, and tells us that our policies, our set of policies that were designed to lessen imports, had no impact on the price of crude. So let's say why. That really brought us to OPEC. We hear from a lot of energy analysts OPEC doesn't matter anymore, that OPEC is a dysfunctional countries, that they are always at odds with each other, and they really lost control over the market. And we want to take issue with this assumption and start off by looking at this slide here and explain why OPEC does matter. In fact, why OPEC is still the most important factor that determines the global price of crude. Maybe on a daily basis, but if you look over the past 40 years, the numbers are pretty instructive. So we just looked at the numbers of the past 4 years since 1973 until today, 2013. World population over this period of time grew from 4 billion to 6 billion people on the planet. The number of automobiles quadrupled. Today, about 1 billion cars on the planet. World GDP has grown 14-fold from $5 trillion to $70 trillion today. World demand for oil almost doubled. And you can see what happened to the price of crude. Went up from $13, roughly about $100 today. But let's happen to OPEC's production. And I want to remind that OPEC controls 3/4 of the world's conventional crude reserves. OPEC's production today is exactly at the same level that it was 40 years ago. So clearly, to say that OPEC doesn't matter is a close of the starting numbers. That the very same cartel that has been in control of most of the world's conventional reserves, and it is allowing itself to produce the exact number of barrels that it did 4 years ago, while the world economy has grown and grown and grown, and is continuing to grow with the emergence of China and India, I think this is a real problem that we need to contend with. So why is it that OPEC doesn't increase production? Or why is it that OPEC does not produce in line with its capacity and in line with its control over reserves? And that's to what we call the break-even price of oil. Break-even price is basically the amount of money that one would need to generate per barrel in order to sustain its economy. And we looked at Saudi Arabia, we looked at a number of other OPEC countries. I'm going to focus on Saudi Arabia because I think, number one, it's the most important producer within OPEC, and two, it's a unique case which is instructive to understand and realize that why oil prices will continue to rise no matter what we do domestically with regards to import. So that shows you that now remember about Saudi Arabia, 28 million people. Most of them work in the public sector, work for the government. There's a very small private sector in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis don't have income tax, so it gets cradle-to-grave services from the monarchy, and they need more and more money to people happy, because if they're not happy, then they rebel, and we saw what happened to Mubarak, we saw what happened to Gaddafi when people were not happy, and the Saudis, of course, want to stay in power. So one important thing to remember about Saudi Arabia, it's also one of the biggest consumers of oil in the world, the sixth largest consumer today. That means that its domestic demand is growing, which leaves less and less oil for export. So when you ask yourself how much money will the Saudis need to bring home plus their budget, you see that there is just a perfect correlation between the break-even price of oil over the years and what was actually the price of oil over a period of time. And today the Saudis, for example, need roughly $90 a barrel. And they're considered to be the doves within OPEC, the hawks like Venezuela and Iran and Algeria. They need $100. So when you hear about OPEC countries not long, it's because the Saudis only need 90 and the rest need over 100. And that is within OPEC about whether it should be 90 or 100. But for us, it's really less important because we don't need to pay 90 even. I mean, I don't think that the price of oil should be that high anyway. But it will be, and it will continue to be. And with Saudi Arabia in particularly, very important to understand that after 2020, they begin to eat into their cash reserves. At that point, in order to avoid getting into serious deficit, they're going to have to pump the price of oil even further. Now, if all the revenues come from oil and you need to bring more and more money to balance your budget, you have two ways of doing it. One is to drill for more oil, to go faster and faster. Another option is to drill less. In other words, produce barrels at higher price each. Obviously, the Saudis have taken the second option. That's what has been done over the past 40 years. Every time we, on OPEC, we drill more, then less. Every time that we find ways to produce or to consume, less oil, through efficiency or through higher gas prices, etc., or if we have a recession, they drill less as well. Basically, we're dealing with the cartel. The objective of a cartel is to maximize the profit of its members. And as long as the cartel operates in this uninterruptedly, using those kind of methods, they'll be the price makers and we will be the price takers no matter what we do. And I think that's the key point to understand, because once you understand this, you understand the set of policies that have been advocated by many, many good people and policymakers and organizations, while they have myths. For example, if you look at our trade balance, you look at the creation of jobs, there are many economic benefits. If you think about efficiency, there are many reasons why our cars should be more efficient. They pollute less, more money stays in our country to create jobs and investment opportunities. These are all good things. But what policies do not do, and there's absolutely no evidence that they do, is to affect the global price of crude, because crude oil is a global commodity, and everybody essentially, if the oil goes up, it goes up for everybody. And therefore, we need to think about a whole new paradigm to address the monopoly of oil in the transportation sector, to address the fact that there is a cartel. And we have today a unique opportunity to do it with the natural gas abundance that we have today. It's an instructive moment in our history, and that's what we want to present now. I'll let Annie take over and talk about what we think be the new energy oil paradigm for the United States.
So guys, what Gal has said up until this point, and then to move forward. Firstly, keep in mind that if it wasn't OPEC that was sitting on 78% of world conventional oil reserves, rather international oil companies like Exxon and Chevron and BP and Shell, they would be a supply level of just 1/3 of global supply, which is where OPEC is today. If companies that were on 78% of reserves were just like OPEC is today at only 1/3 of supply, they would be facing antitrust action. They would be at 72% or 80% or something in the ballpark of what their reserves allow. The thing is that you can't bring antitrust action against sovereign regimes. And so the question is, what can you do? Now, OPEC is a cartel, but as an elective, it acts as a monopolist in the market. And not much that we can do about that. But what makes OPEC's monopoly position in the oil market much more important, because after all, we don't really care if somebody's monopolizing the cocoa market or the rubber market, it's the fact that oil essentially has a monopoly over transportation fuel, and therefore OPEC, as a collective, has a monopoly position in the transportation fuel market. Now, gas, among other commodities, allows us to break OPEC's monopoly position over the transportation fuel market by putting it into competition with other energy commodities. The question then becomes, what is possible to do technically? What are the policy possibilities for making these things happen? First, it's important to understand that because of the unconventional natural gas in the United States, really unconventional natural gas revolution, the price of natural gas and the price of oil have disconnected on an energy content basis. Traditionally natural gas and oil were priced about the same on an energy content basis, meaning per energy unit, but today it's no longer the case. Natural gas is much, much, much cheaper than oil in the United States. Unlike oil, with a fungible, think of the oil market as a swimming pool. Producers pour oil in, consumers take oil out. It doesn't matter who you buy your oil from, and essentially globally, more or less, every faces the same price. Natural gas is not in that situation. It's not a global market. It's different markets around the world and different prices around the world. And the price of natural gas in the U.S., because of unconventional gas, very, very low today. And so if we were to use natural gas in the transportation sector, obviously that would not just the United States, but other countries as well. Natural gas, coal, biomass, other commodities, obviously that would be a very good way to arbitrage against oil. So focusing in specifically against natural gas, what we see in the we use very, very little natural gas in the transportation sector overall. A teeny tiny amount of natural gas is used in the transportation sector today. I think about how natural gas can be used in the transportation sector. There are multiple ways to do it. Firstly, obviously, we can just use natural gas directly, use it, for example, as compressed natural gas, that's CNG, in vehicles that are capable of using CNG, either biofuel vehicles or vehicles that run exclusively on compressed natural gas. Secondly, we can use natural gas to generate electricity, use that electricity to power plug-in hybrid or pure electric vehicles. Third, we can use that natural gas to make a variety of different liquid fuels, from synthetic petroleum products to alcohol fuels, and specifically the alcohol fuel methanol. There are other options, but these are the major options. Now, I was going to talk a little bit about electrification of transportation.
Well, I look at the discussion about electric vehicles. I tend to remind people that electric vehicle is a natural gas vehicle. If you live in a place where electricity is made from natural gas, then your electric vehicle is a natural gas vehicle. And if you live in a place where your electricity is made, like in the Midwest, primarily from coal, then your car is a coal vehicle. So we tend to think sometimes about electricity as if it is a source of energy. It's not a source of energy. It's an energy carrier. So we have to always look at what it's made. And therefore, when we look at electric vehicles, we tend to look at them as another way to utilize natural gas in the transportation. And we are very bullish about electric vehicles. We think that that would be really in the game. Definitely full driving experience. It's a product that really redefines as expectations with regards to however, we call the chapter 4 deal with EVs. We titled it the time factor, because I think that a lot of people tend to ignore the ramp up and the challenge of bringing millions of electric vehicles, battery operated vehicles to the marketplace. So a few things I think that's worth remembering here, and again, I don't want this to be misconstrued as lack of support on our behalf. I think that we are completely of the push towards electrification, but it's important to realize that it's of cost. Today, batteries are still very expensive. In some cases, they cost more than the car. So we need to see significant cost reduction with regards to lithium-ion technology, and the situation in which batteries today are still and will be continue to be for a long time boxes with some commodities. And a lot of people that are talking about Moore's law and batteries tend to ignore the fact that commodities don't really exhibit a massive decline in prices. And all I'm saying is that it will take time. We have to pick, but I think that when you look at the battery value chain, you'll see that really these things will take decades to ramp up, and we need to have stopgap solutions.
So getting back to other ways that we can use natural gas in the transportation sector, I'm actually going to jump over to Brazil. And when people think of Brazil, of course, you think of ethanol, and specifically made from sugarcane. But it's very instructive to see what happened in the Brazilian vehicle market, because it gives us an example of how quickly a ramp up to flex fuel vehicles, and these are vehicles that can use a variety of alcohols in addition to gasoline. And alcohols, of course, include not just ethanol, but also methanol. It is very easily made from natural gas, and a bit later in the presentation we'll get into the economics that can be made from coal, certainly from biomass, and also from recycled CO2. Though the economics of the latter are not as attractive. if we look at flex fuel vehicles have a cost premium of well under $100 cars compared to gasoline-only vehicles. One fuel tank, and you don't have to measure or empty the fuel tank before filling in a different fuel. You can just fuel with whatever happens to be fuel happens to be more economic at the moment. And what we can see by looking at the Brazilian example, you see a red line, a blue line, and the green line, but the line to focus on is the green line. And the green line is Brazil's introduction of flex fuel vehicles in 2002, had a very, very quick ramp up into market. Within 3 years, they were well past 70%, almost at 80% of new cars were flex fuel vehicles. Indeed, by 2008, such a substantial portion of vehicles with flex fuel is still that when oil prices spiked to $147 a barrel, people were able to make a per mile price comparison, because of course different fuels have different energy densities, so you can't compare the per gallon, you have to look at the cost per mile. They were able to make a per mile cost comparison of the different fuels. Alcohol less expensive, and year gasoline actually became an alternative fuel in Brazil. Now, having a vehicle allows you choice doesn't predetermine which fuel you're going to use. It doesn't determine that one fuel is the particular winner. But what it does do is create a competitive market in which you can arbitrage commodities against each other. Commodities can compete against each other. And what that serves to do is direct commodities to equilibrium price, where the price of oil goes down and the price of the competing commodities goes up. And if we look at a global market, first we're going to talk about China and then shift into what this would mean for the global market in terms of what this would mean for, in essence, the market itself via arbitrage depressing the price of oil in a substantial way. So let's jump over from Brazil to China. While Brazil focuses on sugarcane ethanol because of their climate and the conditions that are suitable for sugarcane, China has made methanol, an alcohol, a strategic fuel because the economics of methanol, and specifically in China, the focus has been on making methanol from coal. The economics of methanol are tremendously favorable. They are so favorable, in fact, illegal fuel blending is rampant in China. It's much cheaper for people per mile to use methanol, and so they prefer to do so. And you're seeing methanol, which really started in Shaanxi province, which was a major coal province, and China spread out to other regions and slowly spread out throughout the country. And you see a very substantial ramp up in methanol production capacity. In the chapter 6 in the book, we really focus on China as a case study. What's very interesting to see, looking specifically at methanol prices in the U.S. over years, and this graph shows you the price of methanol and the price of regular gasoline per energy unit. Think of it as the price per mile comparison, a relative comparison of the price per mile. And what you can see is that over the years, for a substantial portion of the period, the price of methanol per mile was much lower than gasoline. And so the question becomes, how much does it cost to make methanol from natural gas? And natural gas prices, like I said, are very low today. We don't believe they are going to be sustained at this price. It's not an economically sustainable price. This price is too low, maintained given the lack of attractiveness for much of the natural gas production today at this price level. And if alternatively, if demand for natural gas goes up, that will also drive the price up. But looking at today's natural gas prices, we see a production cost of methanol from natural gas, and methanol is a chemical. And many plants to make methanol are come back to the U.S. since natural gas prices are so attractive. It's a chemical that's used for everything from windshield wiper fluid to wastewater treatment. It's pervasive in our environment. But the price of making methanol from natural gas today is just about 40 cents a gallon. And that methanol has about half the energy of gasoline, and I'm using very conservative numbers here. I'm ignoring the fact that methanol has a higher octane, so you get an efficiency kick from that, just to really give you an illustration of the value, potential value here. But to really do a rough estimate, take a gallon of methanol, multiply it, and that will kind of be a way to compare with the price of gasoline. what you have to note, so even at this 40 cent or so production cost, we know the wholesale price of methanol is the spot price of methanol in Houston. Methanol has been trading for about $1.10, $1.15 a gallon for a very, very long time. So obviously that's an industry that's a very happy industry today with a very hefty profit margin. So if you look at this production cost graph, you can see you can go very, very much higher than we are today in terms of cost of natural gas and still have a situation where making methanol and selling methanol at spot prices where it's selling, which it has been selling at for a variety of natural gas costs over the years, is profitable for the industry. And what that tells you is ignore the low production cost of methanol, but rather look at the much higher wholesale cost of it. Take that number, multiply it by 2 to a wholesale gallon of gasoline, add tax, add distribution cost, add a retail markup, and you have a fuel that on a per mile basis is still substantially less expensive than gasoline and will be so even if natural gas prices go up. And the question becomes, people say, well, if a fuel like this, and methanol is just one example of a variety of different fuels that are economic competitors together. The question is, if this is so economic, why isn't it happening? Why don't we see this throughout the market? And what I would give you is think of a person that has very severe food allergies, but start every day buying a cup of coffee with milk in it. Unfortunately, they're allergic to every single type of milk other than soy milk. Soy milk would go to $50 a gallon. They still couldn't put cow milk in their coffee. That's the situation that we're facing with our cars today. Our cars, in essence, are allergic to everything other than gasoline. And until we get over this food allergy that our cars have to everything other than gasoline, it doesn't matter how expensive gasoline gets and how inexpensive other fuels are in comparison. You're not going to be able to go to the pump and put something else in your car. And at the same time, the fuel station's going to, hey, all those cars are allergic to anything but gasoline. Why would I bother selling something else? And investors are going to say, hey, all those cars are allergic to anything but gasoline. Why would I bother expanding capacity in different fuels? And so on and so forth. So we have a massive chicken and egg issue. Now, the graph here just very quickly shows you a very substantial increase in methanol production over the years. That's mostly coming from China, and that's driven by China's transportation sector. Going back to the variety of different options that we have for competing with oil, and I want to point out something very important, because I mentioned earlier that when you have commodity arbitrage, eventually you'll hit an equilibrium price energy unit basis for the different commodities. What does that tell us about where the price of oil will eventually be if we're in a situation in which cars are plunged to fuel competition? So cars, if you look at the simplest way to it, if most new cars are open to liquid fuel competition or flex fuel vehicles and eventually move towards electrification and other options, but let's just look at liquid fuel choice of the flex fuel option and understand where that would take us. If a substantial portion of new cars, essentially a substantial portion of the overall fleet is open to liquid fuel competition, what that does is send a very strong signal to investors. If fuel is economic, if the underlying feedstock, natural gas, coal, biomass, whatever, the technology that you're using to convert that feedstock into a fuel and the end product's fuel is economic for a variety of different oil prices, then you expand capacity and produce it. With sufficient capacity expansion in competing fuels, what you get is competition over transportation fuel market share. And transportation over market share are products that are substitutes of each other. The competition between Coke and Pepsi and Dr. Pepper and other different sodas. Competition on substitutable products is waged over price. You have competition over market share among substitutable fuels, again, with sufficient capacity expansion. The price of oil will be dragged down to the level at which those competing fuels are economic, with a $50 or a bit less, $50 price band per barrel of oil. Not overnight, but eventually, with sufficient competition, with vehicles that are open to competition, and with the resulting capacity expansion amongst the different fuels. Jumping quickly to look at the different options that we have, this chart just gives you a comparison of the pluses and minuses of the different options we have for using natural gas as a transportation fuel. It's a very big market. There are lots of niche applications in this market for light-duty vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles, commuter cars, cars that are just used to hop over to the train station and take the train, cars used for weekend driving. Many American households have more than one car. So there are many options. And options have bigger cost on the vehicle side. Some options in terms of the infrastructure cost, but it's a market and there's room for many options. We think that in terms of looking at the near term and looking at duty vehicles, the vehicles that most people drive just in their personal lives, then liquid fuel is an easy way to ramp up the fuel competition.
Sort of government in all that, and that's the question that comes to mind, particularly now today in Washington. Should government do it at a time that government is very it has to do with tax incentives and subsidies. We're in a whole different era today in which government doesn't have money to fund, and we have to be realistic of what can be about the expectations, and also be realistic of what could innovation produce in a relatively short period of time. We started the book with Milton Friedman. We ended up with Friedrich Hayek. These are two of the most prominent free market economists. And we quote others who made the case that the role of government in our lives is to demolish monopolies and cartels, and it can to enable market forces to work. And Milton Friedman specifically said that he used a term called those measures that directly support monopolies. So you see that the single fuel vehicle or the gasoline only vehicle as a measure that indirectly supports a monopoly, that is the monopoly that oil has over transportation, indirectly supports the cartels or enables the cartel to continue to manipulate prices. And Milton Friedman essentially said the first and most important role of government is to do everything it can to remove those measures that support monopolies. So if one has to summarize, the role of government is essentially to enable markets to work, to remove barriers to competition, to remove those barriers that prevent from alternatives like the one that Manny described to compete. And the two main industries that have a role to play here are the automakers and the oil companies, what we call really big oil. So we just want to touch upon those two because I think they're important. One is the automakers. We detail in the book, they are first ones to lose when there is a spike in oil price. And there is, as you can see in the graph, a direct correlation between the price of oil and decline in the sales of new vehicles. Of course, when gas prices are high, people drive less, they make less car accidents, there's less wear and tear, and the automakers lose money. So, of course, that's important to keep in mind. They would be the first to win if oil prices were more under control. That's also about the oil industry, which is traditionally viewed as an industry that is averse to anything that introduces competition to its product. But the good news, what we came up in this book, is a little bit of a silver lining here. That this industry is changing too. We quoted a speech by the CEO of Exxon several months ago at the Foreign Relations when he said, "Everybody is losing money. We're losing our shirts on natural gas." And look at the portfolio. This slide is from the latest quarterly report of Shell. Shell oil is no longer Shell. It's essentially Shell gas, because the portfolio, they have more gas in their portfolio than oil now, and that they lose on the gas. So what I'm trying to say is that the international oil companies, unlike the OPEC members, have an inherent interest to create more demand for the natural gas. Do not create this demand for natural gas in the domestic market, and no escape from exporting it in the form of LNG. And I think one of our listeners actually raised the issue of LNG exports. I think that the alternative to exporting natural gas in the form of LNG is actually to create domestic demand for it here in the United States. It would certainly make more sense to keep it in our country and use it in a way that they make more money, the $3 per million BTU that they're currently generating, and we also substitute oil imports for domestic natural gas. So I think what I'm trying to say is that those two industries that traditionally have been to anything of the type of thing that we're advocating, we may, and hope that it's more than wishful thinking, we may see a sea change in their view as the market realities begin to dawn on them. And if that's the case, then we're likely to see more openness towards policies that introduce fuel choice and competition.
I see one question here from Candace regarding how does OPEC have monopoly pricing power if it only controls 30% of supply? Candace, the important thing to understand is that OPEC's monopolist position in the global oil market stems from the fact that it controls 78% of global reserves. Okay, as a cartel, collectively as a monopolist, it has suppressed its production capacity in point where it's only accounting for 30% of supply. And because it is really the lowest cost producers, think about how much it costs Saudi to lift a barrel of oil. You're talking about $50 a barrel or so. It is the OPEC countries in which it is least expensive to ramp up production and to expand production. And they have not done that. And that's the situation that we're facing today. The position stems from their control of global conventional reserves. We're open to questions now if anybody has any additional questions.
Thank you, Nagal, for that presentation. I have a couple questions that have come in. Let's see here. So one is ethanol, methanol are high octane fuels. This question comes from Robert. Length of the vehicle variable compression engine, like the 2006 Saab, is the 1.0 Ford EcoBoost engine and the 214 Ford Fiesta a variable compression engine?
Well, the interesting thing about variable compression engines, especially not just looking at, but in general vehicles that allow higher compression, is that alcohol has a higher octane than gasoline. And if you're able to increase compression on the vehicle, then you're able to take advantage of alcohol's higher octane to squeeze more out of every gallon of fuel. So to get more bang for your buck, bang for your gallon, bang for your dollar and cents, than you would with lower compression cars. So in general, any move towards higher compression or variable compression is a good thing.
Thanks, Anne. And our next question comes from Tom, and he says, is there a less intrusive way to get flex fuel vehicles? For example, could you get manufacturers to stub in connections for alcohol fuels that you might be under $150 for each of 10 to the 15 million cars a year?
Talking about in terms of making a vehicle a flex fuel vehicle, alcohol is more corrosive than gasoline. So ethanol is more corrosive than gasoline. Methanol is more corrosive than ethanol. Methanol is it's a simple alcohol and it's the most corrosive. If you're car into methanol, it's really open to everything, to actually a broader array of fuels than just gasoline, ethanol, and methanol. The point is to make a car flex fuel is very, very simple. And what you're talking about is essentially resistant metals in the fuel line and such. Downloading a different piece of software to a control chip in the car so the vehicle knows how to manage it. Very, very low cost. And at the manufacturer's level, it's not something that is difficult. That's why we saw such a rapid ramp up up Brazil. Now, it's not something that you're going to do overnight, but with, let's say, a 3-year lead time, I think it's very reasonable to expect 50% of new cars that automakers sell in the U.S. to ex-fuel. I think if they had a 3-year lead time, they could definitely reach numbers like that. And one point I want to raise that we didn't raise during the talk, we talked about the economics of the issue. It's important to understand that oil, of course, has a significant geopolitical impact. And if we want to reduce the impact, eventually none of this can be done overnight, but reduce the impact of oil on geopolitics, and it's very instructive to look to history. Our previous book was called Turning Oil into Salt. Now, salt was one strategic commodity because it was the only way to preserve food. It had a monopoly over food preservation. And with the advent of, you think about it this way, salt really determined the stature of countries on the world stage. So some countries were very, very important that would otherwise be completely irrelevant, and indeed today are completely irrelevant to global affairs because they had a special reserve of salt. The advent of canning and later refrigeration means of food preservation, salt became completely irrelevant. So nobody today cares we import any salt, how much salt we import, who holds the world's salt reserves, what world salt price is. It's completely irrelevant. And it's difficult to imagine that salt was as important as oil is today, but it was. And it's difficult to imagine oil being as unimportant as salt is today, but it can be and it will be. And making it as unimportant as salt is today requires breaking its vertical monopoly over transportation fuel, making it just another commodity. This is a different use of the word monopoly than the way we used it in the presentation, which was talking about OPEC's monopolist position. Now we're just talking technically about the fact that, oil doesn't compete with commodities and transportation fuel. But this would have a profound impact on geopolitics.
Thanks. That was really informative. And I actually read the book, and it really illuminated many important things. So on that note, I think most of the questions have been answered, and there were a lot of thoughtful questions, but unfortunately we're out of time. And this will conclude our first Fueling the Future webinar session. You, Ann and Gul, if you have any other comments or closing statements you'd like to make.
I'd be here asked a question about what if all biofuel subsidies were eliminated, and I would indicate that Gul and I are free marketeers. We don't support subsidization, and in general we frown upon government intervention in the market. Note that both the ethanol tariff and the ethanol blenders credit have been eliminated. There's still some the renewable fuel standard and such in place, so there is federal policy in support of ethanol. The subsidies have been eliminated. But in general, I think go back to that graph that we showed looking at production costs of natural gas from natural gas. You have a similar graph for the production cost of methanol from coal. These are tremendously economic. Production cost of ethanol from sugarcane, it's seasonal. Sometimes, depending on the price of corn, ethanol is economic, and it's not as compared to gasoline. But without subsidies, you have a vibrant market with plenty of competition. The issue is having vehicles that allow this competition to occur. Then investors will naturally gravitate towards the fuels that are most economic in their region with the technologies that they have available and with the energy sources that they have available.
Thank you. So everyone will receive an email of today's presentation, so if you find something and you have other questions, feel free to email us. Or if you'd like more information on future webinars, you can go ahead and send us a message. Again, to Gul, Luft, and Ann Korin of IAGS for all who joined us and participated. We hope you all stay connected and join us for future webinars. Good night.